Well, good day, everybody. How's everybody doing today? The Dukester is back. Today is Tuesday, and we know what that means. Tuesday and Thursdays are top 10 days of the week. And as promised yesterday, the National Hockey League starts tomorrow night with its start to its hockey season for the 2019-2020 campaign. And so we're going to dedicate this month to our top 10s to all things hockey in honor of the start of the National Hockey League. And so we will get into various different things throughout the course of the month: top defensemen, top goaltenders, top forwards, top fighters, though that's not as big a part of the game today. But I recall when it was a big part of the game, checkers, stuff like that, defensive players, all those kind of things we're going to get into. But we're going to start today off because it's a team game. So we're going to utilize the aspect of top 10 teams of my era, because I can only put down what I see. I can read about teams of the past. The Montreal Canadiens of the 1950s were heralded as one of the great teams of all time. Rocket Richard, Dickie Moore, Jock Plant, those guys there were great teams. The Toronto Maple Leafs of the 60s, Johnny Bower, Bobby Bond, Tim Horton, George Armstrong, those kind of guys made up some great Toronto Maple Leaf teams. But I wasn't privy to watch them, obviously, because age just didn't allow me to. So when I do top 10, I kind of want to do based on what I've seen. I'm 52 years old, all right? So I've seen a bit in the sports world. I've watched all four sports, more so, baseball, football, and hockey, not as big in basketball. So that'll be a little different someday when we do that. But we got to get to this today, because at the top of the hour, 5 o'clock Mountain Time, the Sunday Night Sports guys are going live tonight, and we'll be discussing Week 4 of the National Football League, taking a look back at Week 4 and seeing where everybody stands. Going to introduce our first ever power rankings, so that's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to talk about our predictions for the 2019-20 NHL season. Bladesy, T-Mac, and myself give you who we predict is going to win the divisions and how we see it shaking out towards the Stanley Cup final. And we're also going to talk about the MLB playoffs, which are set to begin tonight in Washington. I thought it was going to be in Oakland, but I believe it's in Washington today. And the Milwaukee Brewers are in America's nation capital to kick off the playoff season for 2019. All right, let's get right to this list. So 2, 3, 4, 5, as we like to do. 7, 8, 9, 10. Should have had them all listed. Number 10, we're going to start with the current edition of the Boston Bruins. Let me just grab my notes that I had here to recall why. Okay, Bruins. Only won one Stanley Cup, but they've been to 2 other Stanley Cups. Again, this is during my era of what I've watched teams play, which kind of started back in 1975. And this current edition of the Bruins, Stanley Cup champion in 2011, 2 more finals appearances in 13 and 19. And, just as I like to say about why the New England Patriots are probably the greatest football team of all time, a lot has to do with the fact that their success came in a cap league, in the cap era. Well, this is the cap era. And, the fact that the Bruins have made 3 finals within under 10 years, I think is worthy of note. And they are the 10th team on my list. Number 2 is a team that I barely can remember. I see a bit about it. I was about 10 years old, 9 years old, in that area. And that is the 74-75 Philadelphia Flyers. One quick note on those Bruins. You got to understand, you got Chara, you got Bergeron, you got Marchand been there, Rask for 2 of them, Tim Thomas in the first one, Krejci. So, those are guys that have been there. That's been the core group of players that have been with that team to make up that dynasty, somewhat mini dynasty in a sense of the word, if you want to call it. The Philadelphia Flyers, the most intimidating team in the history of the National Hockey League. Just brute force, beat you up. That's how they won cups back in that day. It was just fight, fight, fight. And if that was your style of hockey, then the Philadelphia Flyers were a team you really liked to cheer for. I can remember, them winning playoff series in Toronto against the Maple Leafs, fights in the stands, they're crawling over the glass, all kinds of stuff, bench clearing brawls. I mean, you name it. That was back in the day when hockey was old school, rough, tough, and it was not for the weak of heart. And for the Philadelphia Flyers, with great goaltending from Bernie Parent, solid defense from the Watson brothers, Ed Van Imp, what a great hockey name that is. But of course, one of the greatest leaders of all time. And that might be a good top 10 thing to do this month too. The top 10 all-time hockey leaders. And guarantee you in the top 3 would have to be one Robert Bobby Clark. Him, Bill Barber, Rick McLeish, Reggie Leach. What a team they had. They could not only fought, but they could score goals as well. And it was quite a brand of hockey back in that time. At number 8, I have chosen the LA Kings. Now, the Kings were Stanley Cup champions in 2012, 2014 under Darryl Sutter, pretty much with the same kind of core group they had there. Drew Doughty, Jonathan Quick was the goaltender. Who else was there? Kopitar, I think, was still playing then. So, some of those core type guys kind of stayed through with those 2 Stanley Cups. And first time, Stanley coming into the state of California, although I have to stop and think, where is it? In Anaheim. Yes, I think the Ducks won one first, right? But in actual Los Angeles, the Kings finally broke and did what Wayne Gretzky couldn't do when he got traded to LA back in the 90s from the Edmonton Oilers. The number 7th team on my list that I feel I saw is the Pittsburgh Penguins, and that is the Mario Lemieux Pittsburgh Penguins. They won Stanley Cups in 91, 92, back-to-back, so you got to give them full marks for that. Back when Lemieux was on top of his game, he had his health about himself. They had, what's his name? Played with the Bruins too. The year the Bruins won the Cup. I forget his name off. I shouldn't forget it. But Kevin Stevens played for him. I think even Paul Coffey was there. Tom Barrasso, right? Man, that bugs me. That guy deserves to be mentioned. He was a classy guy too. Richie. Dang, I hate that. Somebody tell me in the comments later, and I'll make up for it there. So Pittsburgh Penguins, number 7 on all-time teams that I've seen. Number 6 goes to the Detroit Red Wings of the Steve Yzerman era, of that era of when Scotty Bowman continued his coaching genius. As we know, Bowman was my number 2 top coach of all time that I've had the pleasure of watching, and that 97, 98, and 02, the Red Wings won Stanley Cups. And, that's very much worthy of note. Anytime you can win back-to-back is definitely, you need to be on this particular list. What's his name? Hasek played for him back then. He was a great goaltender. Mike Vernon appeared with him for one of those cups as well, coming over from Calgary and things. So Detroit makes it in at number 6. Now we get to the top 5. At number 5 is the New York Islanders. And these top 5, an argument can be made for 5 to number 1. I get it. I understand what the argument could be for each team. I just think, there are a lot of things that get taken into account when you're trying to establish a top 10 and why you're placing them where you're placing them. So I'm taking the Islanders, Stanley Cup champions, 4 years in a row, 80, 81, 82, 83. And like I said, they could very easily bump up. It depends on your take and what your criteria is for a top 10. But with a team that had, Billy Smith, one of the all-time villains of hockey. If you were an Islander fan, you loved him. He was kind of that day's Brad Marchand sort of thing, if you want to give it that. Ron Hextall, another guy who was a real hacker in the crease. And Dennis Potvin, one of the hardest defensemen in the history of the game. Another guy that'll make a top 10 defenseman list down the road. Who else? Trottier, Mike Bossy. They go and they get Butch Goring. They picked him up from the Los Angeles Kings. Goring goes on, plays with, I think, for the Oilers, and maybe wins a cup there with them as well. So, I mean, they had some great teams. John Tonelli, and you can remember the first cup. I remember I was mowing the lawn, my neighbor's lawn, and Bob Nystrom scored the winning goal, I think, from a pass from Clark Gillies, another big name for the Islanders in the 70s. So the Islanders take up my number 5th spot. Number 4 goes to the Chicago Blackhawks. Chicago Blackhawks, Stanley Cup champions, 2010, 2013, 2015. Some of the most success that has been seen in the Cap era is the Chicago Blackhawks. Every other year winning. They won in the strike-shortened year of 2013 when they beat Boston in 6 games there. But that was a great, great team. The Chicago Blackhawks, again, in the Cap time. It's not easy managing teams and being able to put these kind of mini dynasties, or you could just call it a dynasty if you want. 3 and 5 years is pretty impressive, regardless of what league you're talking about. In any sport, when you can win 3 out of 5, you definitely have to be on a list there somewhere. So I'm going to take Chicago at number 4. At number 3, I'm taking the Sidney Crosby Pittsburgh Penguins. And again, much the same criteria. Here in the Cap era, 3 Stanley Cups for Sid the Kid. 2009 and 2016 and 2017, they raised Lord Stanley. And, Crosby's going to go down as probably, one of the great players of all time. Some people put him in the argument of the top 5. Some think he might even become the greatest player of all time, depending on the state of the game, how it has changed, the Cap era, all these kind of things, because a lot of people tend to think that the game is the best it's ever been is right now. And again, that's an argument and a debate that's worthy some other time. But for now, we're putting Sid, and the Penguins, had great teams with him, Malkin, Letang, Marc-Andre Fleury, and that. So, I mean, the Penguins of the Crosby era have definitely been a force, and they take up number 3. Number 2, and this could have very easily been number 1. Apparently, they took a fan vote here a couple of years ago. Who is regarded as the greatest NHL team of all time? Not just thinking about the years I've seen hockey, period. And that is the Edmonton Oilers. Who can forget, if you've watched any amount of hockey at all, especially if you're close to my age, the Oilers of the 80s were definitely an electrifying team. They reinvented the game somewhat. Bobby Orr made the that transfer of a defenseman being offensive and not just defensive. And then, some other guys came along, Robinson. But the guy who really picked it up from Orr was Paul Coffey, one of the smoothest, if not maybe the best skater I've ever seen in my life, in Paul Coffey. Oilers, 84, 85, 87, 88. And to show that it just wasn't because they had the greatest player that ever played, in some people's opinions, they go and they win a Stanley Cup in 1990. Makes you wonder where Mark Messier should be in that argument of great players all time. Messier definitely is going to make it in my top 10 hockey leaders of all time. Nobody leads like Mark Messier. He may be the greatest leader, maybe in all of sports. There's an argument to be made for it. That's how highly touted he is as a leader. So 5 Stanley Cups I've watched the Oilers win, but there was breakup in that. So, there's even that argument that the Islanders down here, maybe they're better than the Oilers because they won 4 in a row, right? Speaking of 4 in a row, that takes me to who I claim is the greatest team I have watched, and that is the Montreal Canadiens of the 1970s Stanley Cups in 76, 77, 78, 79, and I think they even had won a couple early in the 70s before the Bruins and the Flyers kind of took a few out of their book and that. But the Montreal Canadiens of the late 70s were just a machine. It was like a team that could play, a regular season the way they did, be so dominant. And if you remember last year, Tampa Bay, how good Tampa Bay was. Tampa Bay reminded me a lot of that late 70s Montreal Canadiens team and how dominant they were throughout the season. But what separates that team from everything else is they maintained the foot on the pedal. And again, a lot of credit has to go to Scotty Bowman. Ironically, when the Canadiens lost, meaning the first year that the Islanders ended up winning their first Stanley Cup, it was in that year, prior to that season, the Canadiens lost Sam Pollock, who's recognized as one of the great, administrators, great hockey guys of his era. Scotty Bowman stepped away. If you remember, he went to Buffalo. Ken Dryden and Jacques Lemaire both retired. Had all four of those components stayed in place for one more year, maybe had made a trade or two or whatever it would have took, could they have possibly won 5? Could they have been the other team, the other Montreal team that won 5 Stanley Cups in a row? We'll never know that because it didn't get a chance to happen. But I tend to think had they stayed together for one more year, they would have made it interesting. Would have been a dogfight with the Islanders. It would have been great to seen them play maybe the Islanders in the Stanley Cup final, because back then it was top 16 teams. Something I think the NHL should look at today to give yourself a shot at having great rivalries meet for the cup. I really don't like the way the playoff format's set up, really, in any of the sports. Like, I think you should always allow yourself an opportunity for the 2 best teams in your sport to be able to meet up at the end of the year. So anyway, guys, this is it. This is my top 10 teams of my era. Like I said, there's probably teams, the Canadiens of the 50s, the Toronto Maple Leafs of the 60s, were probably great teams as well, and would definitely be on somebody's list. But these are the ones that I've saw over the course of my lifetime watching the NHL. Everybody have yourselves a great day. Remember, the Sunday Night Sports guys are coming up in less than an hour, and hope you decide to join us. We're looking forward to doing tonight's show. So everybody have yourself a great night, and we'll catch you tomorrow around the same time, 4 p.m. Mountain Time for Duke's Daily. Everybody have a great one. Bye for now.